So welcome everyone to this month's Jyotish Journey webinar associated with the recently distributed article, Order in the Court, dealing with the people who become Supreme Court justices, either of the US, other nations, or of a state. And we're going to continue to look at such birth charts. But before we do that, given what was highlighted in the article, what are some things that we should be zeroing in on in particular when looking at such charts, just to review?
The lords of the 6th house and 9th house and 2nd house.
So lords of the 9th house, the judiciary, 6th house, 6th lord of the courts, 2nd house, of course, house of speech. Connections between these two is something that we were talking about. What else?
Mark, I just joined. I don't know if I missed something, but is it the Jupiter-Mars-Saturn combination?
Well, Jupiter in particular, right? The planet of the judiciary. Colonel Góngora in his book, probably coming from K. Rao, he was highlighting Jupiter-Saturn connections, right? And so, yes, those were factors that we looked at. Anything else come to mind based on what I highlighted in the article?
Strong Jupiter?
Strong Jupiter, no question. Related to the ascendant or configured in status-giving yogas, right?
Also,
So,
you mentioned the 3rd house can sometimes be involved as well.
3rd house, because these people write legal briefs, right? And 3rd house, 3rd lord is most indicative of that type of writing, and particularly when Jupiter's connected to the 3rd house, 3rd lord, right? He's writing about legal briefs. One other house and house lord that I sort of highlighted towards the end of the article relative to someone becoming a Supreme Court justice. It's an appointed position.
11th
house.
Right, 11th house, 11th lord, related to the idea of, this is a position that's conferred upon an individual, right? They have to be, well, in the US, they have to be ratified by the Congress, but essentially it's an appointment by the president, right? All right, with these things in mind, I'm going to now share screen. And this always takes a moment. Let me try one more time here. And you can let me know when you're seeing the chart of David Góngora, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So who is this gentleman? You can see he was born in Mexico. This is a rather renowned, famous Mexican jurist who became a member of their Supreme Court and then was actually became the Chief Justice of the Mexican Supreme Court. So just take a moment and familiarize yourself with his birth chart and Navamsha. And then, let's talk about distinctive features of this chart and something that strikes you, especially with regards to some of those predictive parameters that we were reviewing. Where's the indication in this person's chart that he could have a very, very high status in life, not just as a Supreme Court justice, but very high status in life?
Exchange.
Go ahead, Luciana. Go ahead, Luciana.
The 110 Mahaparivartana, the exchange between Moon and Venus.
Yeah, everyone should see that the 1st Lord Venus goes to the 10th, while the 10th Lord Moon goes to the 1st. Very powerful 110 exchange, which, something like the Lagu Parashari highlights as being a combination that can be particularly productive of Raja Yoga, meaning putting a person in a very high position. What else strikes people?
Lord Swan, 12th Lord, aspecting the 6th.
Well, Mercury's not just the 12th Lord. What other Lord is it, Neelamon?
It's the 9th Lord.
Right. So we have a 9th
Lord aspecting 6th house, yes.
we have the ninth lord exalted it as the 12th lord in the 12th also, but then aspecting onto the 6th house. And then what would you make of this Mercury-Saturn combination?
Trikona Raja Yoga 5-9.
It's a very
4-9-5-9.
Yeah, it's a very good Raja Yoga for anyone with Libra. Mercury being the ninth lord in the impressionable 12th, and then Saturn, of course, being the Yogacaraka planet. Here, it's influencing the 6th house of the courts, obviously, and it's actually quite a superior Raja Yoga for these for this particular Lagna. And then what underlies it, meaning what happened? Go ahead.
This Mercury is exceptional. Not only is it in its exaltation sign in the D1, it actually goes, it's in an exchange in the D9, and then it's also part of that Shubh Ubichari Yoga, where Sun is flanked by 2 benefics, both in strength.
As usual, Rohit, you go to the head of the class. Let's just review with what he highlighted here. So Mercury is not only a very strong ninth lord involved in this significant Raja Yoga, affecting the 6th house, 6-12 axis, but you'll see in the Vamsha, it has additional strength by virtue of the exchange. And then it's also a part of a good Shubha Vichara Yoga. And notice that the focus of that Shubha Vichara Yoga is the 11th house, right? And you might see the sun there as the 11th lord in the 11th house also gets the aspect of Jupiter. So very benign, very highlighted, well situated 11th house, 11th lord. Mercury involved in these multiple yogas. And then one thing we haven't mentioned yet, highly relevant to the discussion about some planet.
Jupiter is strength.
Jupiter, of course, as the 6th lord.
Aspecting the 9th house.
But also as the 3rd lord in the 3rd house. And yes, it's aspecting onto the 9th house. So, it's easy to
Mark,
see.
there's also an aspect from Saturn in the 6th to Jupiter. So there's a connection between Saturn and Jupiter here, not just the Sambandha, Kenda Sambandha, but the aspect of Saturn onto Jupiter.
Right. So there's that Jupiter-Saturn connection that Colonel Gore was highlighting.
Both in D1 and D9.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
The second house is strong as well, with Mars being in the 2nd house, its own lord.
Very strong, right? And then also creating a 2-9 connection because Mars is aspecting onto the 9th house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, and I just saw this chart for the first time this morning. I was digging around on astrodatabank.com for additional charts of Supreme Court justices to include here. And in pulling this chart up, it just really sort of completely fit everything that was being discussed in the article. I thought that was quite interesting. Now, noticing where the moon is at birth, which nakshatra, and in which Mahadasha he therefore started life, take a guess as to which major period is when he became a Supreme Court justice and then later Chief Justice.
Jupiter.
Moon is in Swati.
Mm-hmm.
Moon's in Swati, so Jupiter probably would have been a little early.
Saturn.
Saturn is certainly a possibility, but it was actually not until Mercury that, he was in his 50s at that time. And the sub period in where this happened was in the sub period of Venus. Now, I was holding a fairly beginning webinar yesterday, and someone was asking me a question. They were under the impression that with a Shubha Ubachara Yoga, that yoga would only manifest in the major period of the sun. And that's not my experience at all. It's that, when a person runs any period connected with that Shubha Ubachara Yoga, then that yoga does get activated, and along with any other yogas that the planet may get involved in. And so it's seen Mercury here so strong as the 9th lord of the judiciary, involved in this superior, unblemished Raja Yoga, but then also a part of the Shubha Vichara Yoga. And so it was in actually the Mercury major period, sub-period of Venus, But of course, both planets independently give Raja Yoga as well. Now, seeing their disposition in D10, raises an interesting question here. Now, you'll see that this time, even though it comes from a written record and got a AA rating on the Lotus Rodin database, it's fairly clear that it's probably a rounded time and probably not exact. So, the exact degree of the birth lagna, I think, is a question mark. And so it might be a question whether the Dashamsha lagna is truly Capricorn, or it might back up to Sagittarius. Presuming that it is Capricorn, though, what would we notice about Mercury, Venus in the D10 and as a period and sub-period giving this result?
It's part of the Lagna Adi Yoga.
Yes.
And it's Swakshetra.
It's part of the Lagna Adi Yoga, but it's something else is going on here.
Well, there's benefic hemming of the ascendant of the Lagna between the two of them. I can't remember the name of the yoga. Is it a I can't remember the name of the yoga, but there's benefic hemming of the ascendant from the 8th and 6th.
No, Mark is looking for Shubha Sankara yoga.
That's it.
Thank you.
But that's what I know that's what you were referring to, Pete, so I'll give you credit for that. Yeah, it's a Shubha Sankhya yoga, if in fact, Capricorn is the Lagna. Now, if you see the degree of Mars again in the, where does Mars go in the Navamsha here? Where does Mars go? And it's strong in the birth chart given its Swakshetra.
Mars would be exalted in the
Lagna.
Right. It was then, Mercury Venus elevated him to the Supreme Court. It was Mercury Mars actually that brought him to the role of Chief Justice, which I don't know if I would have predicted that based on the Rashi, possibly based on the Dashamsha here. So very interesting chart to consider in the light of all of what this article was about. Another Supreme Court justice, not just a Supreme Court justice, but a chief of the Supreme Court. Any other thoughts and comments? And of course, it's one of those charts where, because the birth lagna and the moon lagna are the same, all the patterns repeat from both and are therefore all the more pronounced.
Mark, I have a comment just about the, the qualifications for a Supreme Court justice. A couple of things I was thinking about when I was going through the articles were, they have to have a pretty broad mind to be able to take in a lot of facts and think about them. So the moon would have to be bright or strong in some way. Mercury seemed to be prominent because of the, need to discriminate and, to be clear in intellect. And also, these are usually pretty independent people. So I don't know where independence shows up. I noticed that quite a few in the article had fire signs in the ascendant, so I don't know what else would be independence. But those things were going through my mind.
Yeah, no, I think they're all good and relevant thoughts. One more thing before we leave this chart. I mean, it was in the Mercury major period that he got this elevation to the Supreme Court, and again, it's an appointment. Where's the connection here potentially to Mercury, to the 11th house, the 11th Lord?
In the nakshatra of Sun.
Right, in the nakshatra of the Sun. It's in Uttara, Falguni Sun's nakshatra at 3 degrees 41. Any other thoughts or comments about this chart before we move on?
Is Mercury also part of that Shubh Mala Yoga, Mark?
Well, when you say Shubha Mala Yoga, are you talking about the ascendant?
Isn't there that yoga where the ascendant Lord is the starting point, and then it goes around the ascendant and all houses have.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I forget the name. I forget the.
How would you see that here? You mean just because all planets, in houses from there? You're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Nehru had it.
Yeah. I missed this, and I think you're absolutely right. Why don't you talk about that and define it again?
I forget, Mark, but I think it was that the starting point has to be the Lagna Lord, which in this case happens to be Venus, and then it goes around, and all the houses have planets in it, and they're like, it starts with the benefic and ends with the benefic, so it kind of becomes a Shubh Mala. Again, I'm very like off on this, but it was something to this.
No, I know what you're talking about, and now after this webinar, I'm going to go look it up because I think it is probably a distinctive feature of this chart. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Anything else, folks, before we go on?
It looks like he has a Mridanga yoga, Mark.
Go ahead, and you want to talk about this?
All the planets have some form of strength. So the sun is Swa, moon is exchanged with Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn retrograde. So every planet has strength, and the Lagna Lord is strong. So it gets strength with exchange.
This is why I love talking to you advanced students. These sort of things come out, and it's wonderful. Good comment.
Mark, there are a couple of things not mentioned in the article, and this chart highlights them. One is Libra, and another one is Sun or Leo. It's a government job that Sun should be strong, or Leo has to be strong in some way. And Libra, of course.
The scales having to do with justice. Yes, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
No, this is good. This is very
like
good.
Like Nilima highlighted, this is truly an extraordinary chart, Mark. With so much, with all these planets, the strength is just amazing. It's just truly an extraordinary chart.
No, it is. I was very pleased to come across it this morning, and that's why I started out with this chart for the webinar. And people are adding wonderful thoughts here, so I appreciate that. But anything else? Okay. So now,
Mark, I think he has all the dispositors yogas.
Say again.
I think he has all the yogas connected to the dispositor, like Quasi Parvata, Parijata, and the other one with the complex name. I don't remember it.
Well, hold on. Why would Parvata yoga apply here?
It's a Quasi Parvata yoga. Well,
I see. Okay, because moon's not in its own exaltation sign, but it's involved in an exchange. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. It's Amala yoga.
There's Amala yoga, right? Just why don't you define that for folks who may not be familiar with it, Nilima?
Natural benefic in the 10th house from the Lagna or moon with no affliction.
With no afflictions, and it should be strong too to be a true Amala yoga. Amala means what?
Stainless.
So when a strong natural benefic without affliction goes to the 10th, the person will act in beneficial ways to the society and therefore have a good reputation, and stainless refers to that stainless reputation. Good comment. And now in terms of Kahala yoga, it has something to do with the dispositor of the Lagna Lord, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Two ways it forms.
Yeah.
Strong Lagna Lord and the 4th Lord and Jupiter in a mutual kendra, which it is here.
Right. This is you could teach a class on yogas in this chart, right? Quite exceptional that way. Good comments, everyone. Let me go to this chart now. Not someone who was a Supreme Court justice of a nation like the U.S. or Mexico or India, but someone who was the first woman to become serve on the Supreme Court justice of the Texas. Although she chose to do so only a brief period of time, someone died, and she was then appointed for about a half-year period. I believe it was from June of 1982 through December of 1982. But she's referred to as a legal legend in Texas, and was a jurist in other ways, both before she served on the Supreme Court for that brief period of time, and then subsequently. So again, this is a AA rated Lois Rodden database birth time. Gives a degree of Lagna not too close to the edge, so I think we can feel comfortable about it being a correct Lagna. And what do we see here? that might be relevant.
Or Saturn exchange.
Yeah, and what would be, why would this be relevant to the kind of person she became?
6-9.
6-9, yeah. Of course, the result being both planets having strength. So we've got a strong 9th lord and we've got a strong 6th lord. They're actually exchanging here. Good. What else?
And then Jupiter is involved.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Pete, say again.
I was just about to say that Jupiter's involved in that exchange.
Yeah, and then
joined to Mars.
Exactly, and see the Kendra Sambandha degrees between Jupiter and Saturn here.
Yeah, very close.
It'd hardly be closer. And as we go on, and I show you other charts that I wanted to discuss today, you're going to see how frequently, and in fact, I wanted to D9 up here first, how frequently Jupiter's showing up in Aquarius, and you all know my comments regards that. So what else strikes anyone?
Sun exalted in the 11th house.
Sun exalted in the 11th, and then what did we just also see about the 11th Lord?
9th.
In an exchange, very strong.
Very strong. Additionally, with 2 benefics. These are some nice done yogas also forming in the 10th house.
Plus the Saraswati Yoga.
In the 9th house. There's, of course, Saraswati Yoga. I think she was valedictorian of her class and went on to place very highly in law school. So she, obviously did very well academically, highly educated. I want to highlight the Sun strong in the 11th also simply because, again, that improves the quality of the 11th house, and then even more so when you see the Lord. And again, she was appointed to this position. What else?
Mars aspects the 2nd Lord. That's strong Mars.
So Mars as the 6th Lord is aspecting on the 2nd, creating that 2-6 connection.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very obviously a 2-9 connection.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn, Jupiter, Kendra Sambandha, strong Jupiter. Now, where's a Raja Yoga giving planet here also?
Venus conjunct with Jupiter.
We have
Venus being the 5th lord and Jupiter being the 10th lord.
Good, Radhika. We've got Jupiter as the 10th lord here in the 9th. That gives Raja Yoga by placement, but it's also conjunct the 5th lord, giving Raja Yoga by conjunction. And what other planet?
Mercury, Nietzsche Bhagaraj.
Well, simply as the 1st lord in the 10th, right? Now, in terms of Mercury's debility here, how would people consider this and why?
It is less than a degree past its highest exaltation point.
Well, I mean, it's in its deepest debilitation.
Oh, sorry, not what I meant to say was debilitation, sorry.
Right. But anybody want to, well, I guess it would be hard for you to guess, but I think I already gave you the date. It was, or did I, was it? No, wait a second, folks. I now have to consult my notes here because I'm looking at a lot of different charts here this morning. Yeah, it was in, what just happened? What are people seeing on the screen?
Seeing the Rashi chart, the Navamsha chart, sign chart from the moon.
All right. So yeah, it was in June of '82 that what are people seeing on the screen?
We are seeing the screen properly, Mark. I mean, exactly what you were showing earlier, so it's fine.
It's okay. All right. So if you look over in the lower left corner where it says the Vimshotri, shows the Vimshotri Dasha, it was actually in Saturn Jupiter that she spent this half a year on the Supreme Court of Texas. Anything else strike you about this chart?
Mark, in terms of Mercury being debilitated, this is kind of a person who is very opinionated and kind of this. I don't see this as contradictory to the juror. This is what they often are. People who sometimes illogical and very opinionated themselves. If you look at what they're doing.
Now, you're attributing that to the debilitation of Mercury here?
Yes, yes. We cannot get away from it.
I see.
Can I just add a point there, Mark, please?
Please.
So the classics have clearly said that the planet for intelligence is Mercury, and the planet for dhi, which is the discrimination or thing, is Jupiter. So one of the gentlemen had made a comment about Mercury earlier in terms of the discrimination. I think that's got more to do with Jupiter than Mercury. Jupiter is the discrimination, where Mercury is the intelligence.
No, I understand what you're saying, but also the classics of Jyotish clearly identify Mercury as Buddhi, right? And given its name, Bud. So on the planetary level, I agree with you. On the sign level, the classics are clear it's D, but on the planetary level, I think, based on its Sanskrit name, that we have to also see Mercury being Buddhi.
I have, in my personal opinion, Mark, which is very limited, I have seen one thing that I've seen. People always talk about some people being childish and some people being, not mature enough, right?
Right.
I have seen that their Mercury is strong, powerful, okay? Which means they have the intelligence. It's just that their Jupiter is in a bad situation wherein they don't have the wisdom or the dhi to act upon that intelligence.
No, it's an interesting point of view. Again, Jupiter, I would say, does definitely relate to wisdom and to judgment. If it relates to pure intelligence, D itself, I wonder, Lilith. And again, we can have differing opinions about this. That's fine. That's fine. It's just a discussion.
Sure.
But I'm glad people are raising these points. Any other comments about? One thing that struck me about this was the condition of the sixth lord from the moon, right? And to see the way in which from Chandra Lagna, Venus becomes the ninth lord in the sixth, right? And just, sort of that collection of grahas in the sixth house in the exchange now, right? Becomes 3/6 at this point. So I thought that was a interesting thing to see about this chart as well.
Mark, is Jupiter exalted in 11th? Some people will take it Jupiter in Kumbha.
Well, we wouldn't say it's exalted, but Brahmahira in the Brihajataka says it gives results like an exalted planet.
So it goes back to your Saturn Jupiter being the period of elevation, right? Just adding to that piece.
Yes, no, I would say so. And, it's always raised the question for me, and you can see the chart of Leonardo DiCaprio and what happened to his Jupiter period around this. He has the moon in Virgo, and then he has Jupiter Vargotama in Aquarius. This Jupiter is not in the Vargotama condition, but it has always raised the question for me whether it creates something of you might say, a quasi-Mukuta yoga, right? Mukuta yoga being defined by when Jupiter is in its own exaltation sign, falling 6 or 8 from the moon. I wouldn't insist upon it. Just an interesting thing to consider. Anything good about this moon in particular as a second lord?
Vargotama.
Vargotama, and then of course, what's the first thing?
Foolish.
Fullness, directional strength.
And Digbala.
Yeah, lots of things, right?
So would this Mercury be a part of Amala Yoga? It's debilitated, but
yeah, well, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Because aspect by strong benefic.
The idea is that, with Amala Yoga is that the benefic should be in strength to give the best Amala Yoga.
Ichabanga.
So it's an open question. Well, that raises the point. I know you were taught, Neelamat, that just a planet that's debilitated in an angle, that alone produces Nichabanga. Is that true?
No.
There are 4 or 5 points. So that was one among them. A debilitated planet in a Kendra from the moon or the Lagna is one aspect of Nichabanga.
Well, that's okay. So that's not what I was taught. I'm not saying that what you were taught was wrong, but you know, I was taught to see the Nietzsche Banga or the cancellation of the debility in different sort of ways, which other than the fact that its dispositor is in fact well placed here and strong, it's really not in an angle from either the Lagna or the moon. And none of the other usual things that I would look for effective cancellation, such as being with an exalted planet, such as being in exchange, such as being with or aspected by its sign lord and so forth, are really not present here. And if you look at what happened in the Mercury Mahadasha, however, it's not as if her career faded. She continued to be a circuit court judge in the state of Texas and have a really prominent legal career continuing into a Mercury major period. So the fact is that it didn't seem to give the Raja Yoga effects that can come about when the first lord's in the 10th. I'm not looking at things like maybe some underlying strength resulting from things like, Shadbala or Panchapaka Bala, but just on the surface here with regards to the birth chart in the Vamsha.
Mark,
Anyway.
Mark,
yes.
For me, Mercury is debilitated. Mercury is the planet that has to do with one's thinking, one's rational mind, the ability to make sense of the outside world on that rational level. And when you have a debilitated Mercury, particularly when there's no cancellation, you usually find that there's some level of distortion in the thinking or in the ability to make sense of what's going on around you. It's almost like you make your own rules, in a sense, that don't conform to other people. I've seen this many times. And even when there is Nichabanga, there is always that element in there of that thinking process. There can be brilliance, but also at the same time, simple things just kind of elude that person, right? I heard an anecdotal story about Einstein, where apparently he had this brilliant mind, obviously, but on the simple everyday level, he couldn't make sense of things like tying his shoelaces or something like that,
No, I've heard that same example. Yeah. No, it's an interesting thing to consider. Now I'm going to pull up, unless there's any other comments about this chart, I'm going to pull up another chart. Very interesting because it's the chart of a German lawyer who became a Supreme Court justice in Germany, but he was also an amateur astronomer and astrologer and wrote books about this. So that's the sort of most unique background additionally. And I'm going to let people consider this chart for a moment. I realized I'm not plugged in, so I need to go get my power cord and plug in. So just people take a moment and consider this. I'll be right back.
Very interesting point, Pete, that you made about the debilitated Jupiter.
The Mercury.
Oh, sorry, Mercury, yeah.
I've seen this so many times with people who have Mercury in Pisces, even when there is a degree of cancellation. On an everyday level, they can be infuriating, to be honest, sometimes, because they just don't make sense of things the way everybody else does. And, it's difficult for other people to understand them.
So anyway, folks, here we are. I'm back now. And I see people are talking about Mercury again because obviously now in this case, there is a very clear factor for cancellation. And what do people notice about Mercury in the Vamsha?
Oh, it's in an exchange with the moon.
In exchange with the moon. Well, now coming back to the birth chart here. Again, this is based on a birth time that comes from a birth certificate. It may have some rounding being on the quarter hour, but you know, I believe the Rashi is probably correct here. What strikes you here about this chart in regard to anything? It's distinctive features, but in particular as related to him being a Supreme Court justice.
Just number one thing is the aspect of a strong Jupiter onto the Lagna Lord, and so and forming a really nice Raj Yoga actually.
Well, yes, very superior Raja Yoga, right?
Yeah.
Lagna Lord only rules, you know, the first house. Jupiter rules the fifth and impressionable. And then, you know, what other sort of Graha Yoga is this a fairly good example of?
Is it Raja Lakshana Yoga?
Yes, it is, Luciana, which is defined by when the you know, Sun and Jupiter are together, especially with well placed, especially if planets involved have strength, and if there's no malefic influence by a normal sort of way, which is all true here, although this chart has strong Kendra placements, right? In which case I would consider all these planets to be in that Kendra Sambandha relationship. Jupiter here, fairly exceptionally strong. Why?
Because it is Swakshetra in the Vamsha.
In Aquarius in the birth chart, Swakshetra in the Vamsha, and in its own, no, it's not. It's
Kesari Yoga, both places.
Yes, that's the other thing about it. You know, there's a, well, would you call this, you know, Kesari Yoga? Would you call it Gadi Kesari Yoga?
Our moon is exalted, so aspect with Saturn and Mars.
It's a Gajakesari Yoga because moon is in a Kendra from both the Lagna as well as Jupiter.
Now, what's missing from it to be among, you know,
benefic aspect?
Yeah, the influence of the additional benefic on Jupiter, but still, I think it's very relevant to the status in life that he achieved. And then, of course, you know,
There's a Chandra Mangal Yoga.
Chandra Mangal Yoga from a strong Chandra Lagna, that Sun-Jupiter combination goes to the 10th, obviously, right?
It's a fairly good Chandra Mangal Yoga. Mars in strength, Moon in strength.
Mars in strength because?
It's Vargotama.
Digbala.
And Digbala.
Yeah, you've got Jupiter Swa in the Vamshi, you've got Mars Vargotama, you have Saturn Vargotama, right?
Mm. The Mars Saturn aspect is a 6-9.
Exactly.
And they're both Vargotama.
Right. Saturn here is a strong 6th lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we don't see Jupiter and Saturn in an aspect with each other, but again, you know, look at their degrees. This is a very close Kendra Sambandha. Now, I don't have, and this is regrettable, I don't have information about when he actually became a Supreme Court justice. You know, before that, he was a successful lawyer, but we can kind of see when that would have likely to happen. And it's fairly clear that it would have happened in his Jupiter major period, which he entered into at age 21. Probably would have still been doing his legal education during that time, but then went on to be a successful lawyer. Obviously, the following two major periods would be Saturn, followed by Mercury. So it's going to happen, no doubt, in one of those two major periods.
Mercury here is also part of that unusual Raj Yoga. Debilitated planet in the 8th with the Lagna Lord strong.
It could potentially be giving Rashi's exception, I would agree. I would also look at this combination from a strong Chandra Lagna.
Yeah, I saw the Saraswati Yoga.
Yeah, you see a very nice Saraswati Yoga. And then what does that combination of Mercury and Venus become from Chandra Lagna?
1-5.
Right. 1-5. And what do you see here in terms of considerations of the 11th house? It's better from Chandra Lagna.
Yeah, from Chandra Lagna, it's really good.
So, but we can't time it because I just couldn't get that information. It wasn't available online. Any other comments about, this Raja Lakshana Yoga? And then, I think Leonid made a very astute comment here, and something that I had not brought into play, and that is the fact that all of these people were government employees, right? In which case, obviously, Karaka for that is, in fact, the sun. And probably should have been evaluating that planet and its potential connection to the 10th house, 10th lord, either from the birth log or from the moon. Here it's from the moon. That might be a very relevant consideration. Okay, they were government jurists, right? Okay, and now we're going to look at the chart of someone who was a Supreme Court Justice of Spain. And the birth time does come from a written record. However, you see 2 a.m., obviously a rounded birth time. Now, the degree of the Lagna that this birth time gives is 525. So it's either going to be Sagittarius, or there may be some potential that it backs up to Aquarius. This chart reminded me a lot actually, of the chart of Sandra Day O'Connor. I don't know if anyone remembers that chart, but anyway, what do you see here before I, sort of discuss more about that? Go ahead. Vijay, did you say something?
No, it's Georgie.
Georgie, go ahead.
So Saturn in this chart is very, very strong.
Really strong.
Yes.
Of course, any planet that stays at this degree of Libra is going to be Vargotama, but is also going to continue to fall in many Vargas in Libra. So, this position of Saturn creates an extremely powerful Saturn, which of course would be the second and third lord in the 11th here.
And it's in Parivartana.
It's Venus.
211, and then from the moon is a 3-6.
Very, very good. Absolutely.
And not only that, even the Mars is very strong in this case.
Yes, Vargotama exalted.
It is, isn't it? The way in which it's like, if you look again at the chart of Sandra Day O'Connor, she has the Lagna Lord is Jupiter because it's Sagittarius Lagna and it goes to the 6th. Right? Now, in her case, it's in an exchange with an exalted 6th Lord Venus, who then goes to the 4th. But another way in which the chart's similar is that the 9th Lord Sun in her chart goes to Pisces in the 4th as well. In her case, it's with Mercury, not the case here. But still, it's a strongly placed 9th Lord giving Raja Yoga-like placement. And then, where is the status giving yoga?
Kesariya.
Yeah, to Jupiter.
Both D1, D9.
It's yoga. People may have noted that both in the previous chart we looked at, now in this chart, it's a Kesari Yoga or Gajya Kesari Yoga, in which Jupiter is falling in the 10th from the moon. Again,
Also,
Nodal Raja Yoga.
Sorry, Neelama.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just about to comment that Jupiter in the 6th house is the Lagna Lord aspecting onto that Venus and onto that Mars. So it kind of personalizes the whole Venus-Mars-Saturn combination.
well, it creates a connection between the first and the 6th, right?
Yeah.
And then, also with the 6th Lord in the 2nd, it creates a connection, that 2-6 connection. The 9th Lord here is the Sun. I don't really see it being connected to either 6 or 2.
No, me neither. I was simply pointing out that because Jupiter's the Lagna Lord,
It's in the nakshatra of
It really
second lord.
personalizes them.
Sun is in the nakshatra of second lord.
It is. It is. It's in the nakshatra of the sun. That's
Saturn.
Good call. Right. And let me see if I have information about when he was a
At 6th lord, would it be in the nakshatra of Saturn or would it be in the nakshatra of Jupiter?
Which planet, Rui?
Sun.
Sun is in Saturn's nakshatra. Right?
Right. My bad. No, I was thinking about, sorry. I was thinking of something else.
I'm trying to see information. Yeah, it would have been his Rahu period. It would have been his Rahu period that he became a Supreme Court justice. I don't have a sub period. Why would Rahu potentially be able to do this?
Nilima, I think, mentioned that, the nodal Raj Yoga.
It is.
Acts like Sun and Jupiter.
It is a nodal Raj Yoga, so Rahu gives that Raj Yoga result, acting here as an angle lord with the ninth trine lord. And it's connected to the ninth lord. This is one of the reasons why he becomes an elevated jurist during this time. But what does Rahu also activate here?
Mercury.
Well, yes, but
Well, it activates Jupiter.
yeah, it activates the case for yoga involving the Lagna. It's giving results partially also, of course, of Jupiter. It's also in Mercury's nakshatra, yes, but what I was referring to is the activation of the case for yoga. And look at that case for yoga. What houses does it cover?
6 and 9.
6 and 9. Right. Okay. So let me.
And in Navamsa, it covers 1 and 10.
Oh yes, I'd seen this.
With the exalted moon and Jupiter in Aquarius.
I'm glad you're highlighting it. And of course, Rahu is again giving the results of Jupiter. Moon giving its exaltation sign in Lagna here, and Jupiter in the 10th in Aquarius. You see how often Jupiter's showing up in Aquarius, either in the birth chart or in Navamsa. We saw this in the article and in the charts that I used there as well. I believe Raham here was quite correct, and K and Rao used to echo this, that Jupiter in Aquarius gave very strong results, almost like an exalted planet. Any other comments here before we leave this one? Now, this is a woman who became, if I'm not mistaken, the first Supreme Court Justice of Norway. First Supreme Court Justice of Norway. And this is the third chart in a row, and I didn't plan this, folks. What yoga is evident here is in a specific type of the yoga that now is the third chart in a row we've seen here.
Gajukesari?
With Jupiter falling in the 10th from there. And this is actually sort of the real deal Gajukesari Yoga, the complete Gajukesari Yoga. Why?
The Venus, the benefic is in a Kendra and in strength.
Right. Venus is with Jupiter has the additional influence of the natural benefic, in this case, one that is in strength, but also giving also what kinds of yogas also.
And the biggest thing is this Gajukesari Yoga is the real deal because Moon is the Lagna Lord.
In the sense that it gets very much connected to her personally, right? But what other yoga results is Venus giving here?
It's the Maharaja Yoga.
I think you're trying to think of Malavya Yoga.
Malavya Yoga. There's a Sasha Yoga, Malavya Yoga.
Right. And I was teaching about the Mahapurusha Yogas yesterday in the beginner's class, and I was pointing out that in the case of a Mahapurusha Yoga, that comes about by a planet being in its exaltation sign, it's really important to see then what happens to the dispositor as to sort of how strongly that will be a Mahapurush yogi, you might say. And, what is really significant about these Mahapurush yogas as a qualification?
It repeats from the moon and the sun.
That's it, Luciano. It repeats from all three perspectives, right? And Venus in its mode Trikona sign. And look at this Saturn again, not unlike the Saturn we were looking at previously, right? Very early degrees of Libra, it's going to be Vargotama, not just in Navamsha, but so many divisional charts. It's going to achieve a very, very high Vimshapaka Bala as a result. And does anybody want to guess in what period and sub-period she became a Supreme Lord Justice?
Saturn, Venus.
Yes, that's exactly Saturn, Venus. And then consider that combination from Dasha Lagna.
The Saturn Venus is part of the extra. This is a truly extraordinary Saturn Venus combination because it also forms. There are at least 5 yogas that they form. So.
No, it's a fairly powerful one. And there's look at the degree of the sun with Saturn there.
I was looking at that. Yes, the sun is also going to be powerful in a lot of the Vargas.
It's Vargotaman, but that brings up the question of combustion, right? But in my research is this way, and I think many of you read my article, The Icarus Factors, is if the planet has really good compensation in other ways, the combustion doesn't seem to be an issue. Right? And again, it's in the Saturn major period here that is giving this result. What do we notice about Saturn in Navamsha, aside from the fact that it's Vargotama?
Exalted.
Exchange there.
It's in an exchange with its sign lord, right? It's an exchange with its sign lord. So, I believe So anyway, these are interesting charts to look at, right?
So the sun being debilitated in D1 and D9, is that a Raja Yoga or cancellation of debilitation?
Let's think about this, Nilima. It's a debilitated planet who has its debility very effectively canceled in a number of ways. It's with its sign lord, it's with an exalted planet, it's Vargotama, and it's in an angle. Therefore, what result can it give?
Strong, good results, strong results.
Well, it gives Nichabanga Raja Yoga.
Nichabanga Raja.
Yeah. And so, I just found these charts this morning, and I didn't, have any preconceived idea about them, but you can see the really pronounced way. I mean, there's Jupiter becomes the 6th lord here, right? It's with the 2nd lord, Sun. And of course, the 9th lord is Jupiter also, right? So you see all those connections.
Aspecting the 10th house.
Yeah. So
it's also with Saturn.
Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, all aspect the 10th house.
Right. So this is what I had to share with you this morning. And I love the fact that people added to things that I saw. And we had some good discussion about that. Any other, I was going to write an article about lawyers, okay? But the difficulty with that is that there's so many kind of, so many aspects of the law that people practice, right? I have a lawyer friend who just works on wills. There's the corporate lawyer, and then there's the litigator, right? The defender and the prosecutor. And so, there's so many ways. And so, I wanted to narrow it down. So I thought I would start with the idea of lawyers who then had the exceptional legal careers of then becoming jurists, but not just jurists, but Supreme Court jurists, to make it a more discrete study. It just made it easier. Right?
So Mark,
go ahead.
On that front, real quick comment. It's interesting that there are examples in the article you had written where Ken Rao had commented he was part of a tribunal in Bihar for the very first case study, right? And he has written that he was, sort of adjudicating cases. So it's like almost like a judge, but never formally trained as a legal jurist or practiced as a lawyer. He's a literature major who went on to, let's say, do a sort of adjudication of cases. So I thought that was interesting, and it would bring somebody who sort of had that role, either in a tribunal or a non-formal judicial role.
It's interesting you should say that, because his chart really does reflect many of these factors that we're talking about. Exactly. Especially he's got that powerful Jupiter Hamsa Yoga in the 10th house as the 6th lord. And he was around the courts and around that whole process, and judges and lawyers at one point in his career to a very, very great degree, right? And, just as an off thought, it made me think about the chart of Napoleon Bonaparte. What was Napoleon Bonaparte's lasting legacy in a good way, right? It was this thing called he completely reformed the legal system of France. It was called the Napoleonic Code, that later got adopted by both countries of Europe, and much of it is still in place today. Right? And if you looked at his chart, you would see his Lagna Lord Venus, his Libra Lagna Lord Venus where? In the 9th house, right? And Mercury then, of course, involved in the most significant Raja Yogas for that Lagna. So it brings up the idea that people can, be very involved legalistically without actually being a lawyer or without actually being a judge, right? So, well, I really enjoyed the discussion, everyone. Unless there's any other further questions or comments, we'll conclude for today. Om Masato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Mritam Gamaya Sarvesham Swasti Bhavatu Sarvesham Shanti Bhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Folks, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. All stay well until we all meet again. Namaste.